the city of Chicago, as the evening shadows fall, there are people dreaming of the hills of Donegal. 1847 was the year it all began. Deadly pains of hunger drove 1 million from the land.
September we found that we had nothing really much going on. So we decided ourselves then to go on a series of lectures, and we started this last year. We had very good speakers last year, but this year we managed to get a little bit of funding from the council. So we attracted a bigger range of speakers. Tonight's speaker, as you can see behind me before we start, you can see that there's over the next 4 months, there's a series of lectures, mostly on Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday. We'll also be 2 guided tours, one taking in the James Blaney story in Ballycastle and Titanic, and also another one of Market Ferry, and that'll tie in with the 2 lectures as well. We're very privileged here tonight to have Frank Rogers as our speaker. Frank, he's going to talk to us about farming. Frank most recently was the chairperson of the Glens Mountain Historical Society. He was also the editor of the Glens the last 12 seasons, and he's wrote two books, I think, Frank, in the stained glass. Yeah. So I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your introduction, Kevin. And tonight we're going to talk about the Irish famine. And nearly everything about the famine, the Irish famine, is contentious, even the name. It's known in Irish history very often as the Great Irish Famine, because there were in fact something like between the years 1816 and 1842, there were actually as many as 16 partial or total failures of the potato crop in Ireland. The word famine itself implies that there was a lack of food. Many people would contest that. They would say that there was plenty of food in Ireland, but it wasn't made available for one reason or another to the people. And we'll look at those reasons later on. But at any rate, I just want to make the point that the name is contentious, and in some quarters it's known as Gorta Mor, which is the Irish for the Great Hunger, which is probably a more correct name for it than the Great Famine. And we look initially at the alleged causes of the famine. And I say again alleged because there's no degree of consensus about what the causes were. But these are some of the main ones that have been identified. And one of the main causes was overpopulation. The population of Ireland in 1750 was approximately 2.5 million. In 1841, when a census was taken, the population had rocketed to 8,175,124. There was a massive increase in population. Now, some of those censuses that were taken, first census in Ireland was in 1821, next was in 1831, weren't terribly reliable. And indeed, the census in 1841 may have actually underestimated the number of people who were in Ireland at that time. For example, the military weren't counted, and they would have been responsible for maybe 10 or 20,000 when you take their families and all into consideration. And also the people who were taking the census were the local RIC, and in many instances they were paid according to the numbers that they got. So it is in their interest perhaps to exaggerate. So the point I'm making is that it may not be completely accurate, and that it may in fact be an underestimation rather than an overestimation of the population. Subdivision was another main cause of the famine. By subdivision I mean the practice whereby when a farmer died, or when a son got married, his sons got married, he would divide up the land between them. You can imagine what it is like if a farmer had 3 sons. 3 sons got married, we would give them a piece of land each. If he had 3 acres, they would each get an acre perhaps. The next generation, that was split up again. And the following generation, it was split up again. So within 2 or 3 generations, the parcel of land allocated to those people would be arguably not sufficient or barely sufficient to keep them going. And then when something like the famine came along, they were in real danger. Lack of mineral resources in Ireland was another cause, alleged cause of the famine. There were no great deposits of iron ore. There was coal in Ballycastle, as we all know. There was coal in Coolide and Castle Comer, but to no great, not to the same extent as there would have been in England. Thomas Davis in the 1840s in the Nation newspaper withered on about the great amount of minerals that were available in Ireland. He made the Wicklow Hills sound like they were a veritable El Dorado. But really, there wasn't that much mineral. There certainly wasn't the gold in the quantities that he would have suggested in the Wicklow Hills. So lack of mineral resources is another reason. And profligate landlords. Landlords who are doing their best to keep up with their English counterparts. Landlords who very often lived abroad, lived in London or lived in Paris. And they had a reputation in Ireland, that a reputation as being callous, as being indifferent, as being cruel and self-righteous. And many of them, if you've read your literature, as I'm sure you have, you'll be familiar with the picture of a landlord as portrayed in the Hell Fire Club or in the novels of Ross and Somerville. So profligate landlords who spent their income abroad would be another possible reason for the famine. Other causes would be political insubordination. Ireland was regarded as a kind of a social laboratory for Britain, whereby she would try out things first. And political insubordination, Ireland was often referred to as well as England's political slum. So that is another possible cause. Another cause would be, a major cause, was over-dependence on one crop. The potato crop was a good crop, but if it failed, as it did fail in 1845 and in successive years, then the people were going to be in real trouble. So that's another cause. The prevailing economic theories. The theory of government that was widespread at that time, the Whig theory of government, was that of laissez-faire. In other words, leave things alone. Do not interfere. The government should not interfere with economic progress or economic matters, economic concern. It should be left to individual enterprise. So this kind of doctrinaire Whig theory of economic well-being, if you could call it that, is another cause. And also, and this would be quite contentious, among nationalist politicians, the plea was made that the famine had been caused by, or was caused by, a deliberate policy of genocide. A policy to wipe out, maybe not entirely, but to decrease the population in Ireland. And we look at that too. We look at that in some detail later on, that theory. And people said it was an act of God. Well, that's very hard to prove as well. And lastly, of course, the major cause of the famine was the potato blight, the failure of the potato crop. So those are some of the causes that were put forward as responsible for the famine. I continue to call it the famine throughout. What about the potato crop? What about the potato itself? Well, the potato was first ground by Spanish conquistadors in South America at the latter end of the 16th, maybe in the middle of the 16th century, by people like Cortes and Pizarro and that who colonized parts of South America and brought this new crop home with them. It reached Ireland around 1590, and it was first grown in Munster as a garden crop. It was said that Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the first people to grow it on his estates in Yochum. And the story goes that he sent this crop, or sent specimens of it, to Queen Elizabeth in England and recommended it to her. And she ate, instead of eating the tubers, she ate the stalks, and they are poisoned or something. So that didn't go down too well. It spread from Munster to Connacht, and it became the main food for farm labourers. The potato crop is quite, the potato itself is quite a good food. But as the population increased, so did the dependence on potato. The potato apparently gives the greatest yield over the smallest area of any food that you can eat, any edible vegetable or food that you can eat. New varieties made cultivation easier. A large, rather rough, watery potato called a lumper was introduced, and it was very popular at that time. It is a nutritionally excellent food. It is probably the one crop that will sustain you, the one food that will sustain you. Now, sustain you at probably quite a low level, but it's high in vitamin C, it's high in potassium, it's high in fibre quality as well. It is also lacking, apparently, I'm not a nutritionist, but it's lacking greatly in fat and it's lacking in cholesterol. So all of those would be good points. As I say, at a very low level, it would be sufficient. And if you added to that, if you added milk and if you added herrings, if they were available, then it was quite a good diet. It is difficult to store and transport. It's difficult to store. It won't last for more than a year in normal circumstances. And in 1845, 1/3 of the people in Ireland were dependent on the potato exclusively. So 2 million people were dependent on the potato. What about the potato blight? What exactly was it? Well, it originated in South America, where the potatoes themselves originated. And it spread to Europe on ships carrying guano. Guano is bird manure, which was brought into Europe as a fertilizer. The proper name for it is Phytophthora infestans, the Latin name for it. And it was a fungus disease, which wasn't immediately recognised. There was a warm, humid spring and summer in 1845, and this contributed greatly to the spread of the disease. The symptoms, the leaves became blackened, like shown here, and then it spread down through the leaves to the tubers in the ground, and the tubers rotted and gave off a very nasty smell. And that's a picture of what a rotten potato would have looked like. How was it prevented? What prevention measures were taken? Well, apparently nowadays you remove and destroy the rotten potatoes. You earth up and water from the base up. That wasn't known, it wasn't generally understood at the time of the famine. Nowadays they're spraying, of course, with Bordeaux mixture, which is bluestone, it's sprayed. Any of you that grow potatoes in your garden at home, you realise that you can spray it with Dithane 945. It was noticed in some places, and the famine the potato blight wasn't just confined to Ireland. The potato blight occurred also in Belgium, in parts of southern England and in Wales. It was noticed in Wales that the potatoes grown in the vicinity of a factory, a copper plant factory, but those potatoes escaped to them. So, you know, the connection perhaps should have been made at that time between the provision of copper sulfate, which is basically bluestone, as a deterrent against blight. What about the workhouse? There are very few sources really available, detailed sources about the famine in Ireland. There are some, but the main insight that we get into the effect of the famine in Ireland is through the study of the workhouses. And we look briefly, and I apologise to anybody who has heard this before, Peter and Jerry and others, about the workhouse. But in 1833, a Poor Law Commission was established. Now, the commission was a group of influential people, and they appointed other commissioners to go around the country and find out about the condition of poverty throughout Ireland at that time. They were high-powered, they knew what they were doing, they were influential men. They spent something like 4 years compiling information. And the report was, it was a good report. Some of the things they suggested, for example, were the reclamation of land. Another recommendation that they had was the provision of public works, where people could be employed, for example, in building railways or building canals, and get paid for that. And also a system of assisted immigration. So these were all good suggestions. What happened to those? Well, they made the report in 1835, and the government in its wisdom decided, as so often happens, decided to ignore the report of the commission altogether. And they appointed a sharpshooter, a man called George Nichols, to come over to Ireland. He came over, he spent about 6 weeks in Ireland, and he published his report, and the government accepted it. And the basis of his report was that workhouses should be set up all over Ireland, 130 workhouses. Ireland was to be divided into 130 unions, and each union was to have a workhouse to cater for the poor. And later on, that number was raised, another 30 workhouses were built before the end of the famine. And that provision is known as the Irish Poor Law Amendment Act, which was passed in 1838. And Britain had a similar act which was passed in 1834. So this was passed 4 years subsequently. One of the unions was our own union here in Ballycastle. It was formed in 1840, and it was overseen by an elected board of guardians. The union itself was divided into district electoral divisions. That's what the DED stands for. And the Ballycastle union was different from many of the other unions in that it was entirely contained within the one county. For example, Ballymoney took in parts of Derry, Londonderry, and so on. But the district electoral divisions in the Ballycastle union were as listed there. And some of those elected 2 members, most of them elected 1. But I think there were about 18 altogether, 18 Board of Guardians who looked after the Ballycastle union. And it catered for 26,453 people. So it was a big undertaking. It was an important provision. That is from an early West map in the 1900s. I'm not quite sure, 1904 I think perhaps or later. But it's an OS map, and it gives you the location of the Ballycastle union. It's that building, that diagram there. It's almost like an overhead picture of what the H blocks would have looked like. And indeed, the unions were copied from the prisons of that time. There were great, grim, grey buildings towering over the town. And it was this one was built at the corner of where Leyland Road intersects the Coleraine Road. It was different in some ways from most of the other workhouses in that the entrance to it, I think you can see it better, the entrance to it was a split entrance, which isn't shown here. And the main building was this part here, and these were outhouses and what were insensitively called idiot wards. And the main spine down the middle was used as a dining hall. It would also have been used for church services, I suppose, and that kind of thing. What about life in the workhouse? Well, the principle of entry to the workhouse was called, it operated under the principle of lesser eligibility. And the situation of the able-bodied recipient of poor relief, on the whole, shall not be made really or apparently as eligible as the independent labourer of the lowest class. So in other words, when you entered the workhouse, you were treated worse than the lowest paid labourer outside. Now, if you know what conditions were like in Ireland at that time for the labouring class, they were pretty bad. And yet, the idea was that if you entered the workhouse, you would be treated even worse than that. The idea was to deter people from entering the workhouse so that it would be able to cater for those that were already in it. What about admissions? Well, when you entered the workhouse, families were segregated, strictly segregated. The males went to one side, the females to the other, except for very young children who would sometimes go with their mother. The person entering the workhouse was searched, in case they brought alcohol probably with them. They were stripped, their old clothes were taken from them and fumigated. They were washed, they had their hair cut, they were issued with a uniform, and then they were sent to the wards. And one of the great crimes in the workhouse was escaping over the wall with the prison uniform. Well, there was a fair amount of money expended on providing uniforms, and if you escaped over the wall, if you were caught, you would be severely punished if you were wearing the uniform. What about work in the workhouse? What kind of work was carried on? Gardening. The young boys were very often employed in gardening on the near the entrance to the workhouse, just after you went into the workhouse, that section. Women were involved in sewing. The men were involved in breaking stones, and the young fellows brought stones to the men to break. Sack making, picking oakum. Oakum was picking the tar out of ropes, that are used to tie up ships. And grinding corn. It resembles very much the kind of work that was allocated to prisoners in a prison. And indeed, there is a strong resemblance between the prisons and the workhouses in Ireland at that time. Grinding corn was known. The workhouse diet for breakfast, you were allowed 6 ounces of oats, 3/4 of a pint of buttermilk. For dinner, when they were available, 2 pounds of potatoes and 1.5 pints of soup. For supper, 4 ounces of oats, 2/3 of a pint of milk, buttermilk. After 1846, with the failure of the potato crop, Indian corn was used instead of potatoes. Indian corn was a poor substitute for potatoes. It wasn't nearly as nutritious. And apart from that, certainly outside the workhouse, people weren't familiar with how to cook it. It had to be boiled twice, and it was quite difficult and lacking, as I say, in nutrients. And treacle and water were used instead of milk, and rice was used to counter dysentery. And meals were to be eaten in strict silence. The workhouse was a pretty grim place overall. What about the workhouse staff? Well, these were the main officers in it, the clerk. The man to whom we're mostly indebted for the information about the workhouse and about Ballycastle workhouse. In the records of Ballycastle workhouse, they're contained in several large volumes in the Public Record Office, if anybody wants to have a look at them. The master of the workhouse, now not the schoolmaster, the master, the man who was in charge of the running of the workhouse. And they would be paid about a sum of £25 a year. The matron, who was very often the master's wife, husband and wife team. The chaplain was also paid £25. The doctor, and at the bottom of the pay, the humble school teacher, who was paid a miserly sum of about £15 a year. What about workhouse conditions? If you stepped out of the line, you were punished. You were punished for maybe putting a diet of bread and water. Or if it had been a very serious crime, you could be flogged for it, as did happen. Boys were flogged, for example, for stealing peas in Lisburn workhouse. There was exploitation. You might wonder how people who had nothing, how they would be exploited. Well, the funds that should have been made available to them, or that should have been there to provide better conditions for them to buy food, they were often siphoned off by a master of the workhouse perhaps who hadn't very high moral standards. The workhouses were unsanitary in places, they were cold, and the people suffered greatly from depression. That was the timetable there. They rose at 6 o'clock, there were prayers, breakfast, there was a roll call to see that nobody had escaped over the wall. 12 o'clock there was dinner, 1 p.m. work, 6 to 7 p.m. supper, 8 p.m. bed. And you know, words like dinner and supper sound great because we're used to having good dinners and good suppers, but they amounted really to very little in the workhouse. That is a diagram. I hope you can follow it all right. It's a diagram of the admissions to the workhouse in Ballycastle. There's a theory frequently expressed that Ulster fared better during the famine than other parts of Ireland. They did to an extent, but it's greatly exaggerated. And if you look at these figures for Ballycastle, I think they give the lie to the fact that in this part of the country that the famine did not have a great effect. I think the famine did affect Ballycastle very much, and other parts of Antrim. And you have to realise that Antrim, for example, is one of the counties which is supposed to have fared better during the famine. But that's the whole county. And the famine was very regional in its impact. For example, in County Fermanagh, the own county where I come from, there were islands on Lough Erne which weren't affected by the famine at all. And yet Fermanagh was one of the counties in Ulster that was most affected, the others being Monaghan and Cavan. So, and Lurgan, for example, was very badly affected. Lurgan workhouse was badly affected at the time of the famine. But you can see the figures there. In 1843, the workhouse was built to cater for 300. In 1843, it was operating well below the standard that it was built for. Also in 1840, oh, look at that. Lower the room temperature, Kathy.
I was told to turn it off and turn it back on again, but that doesn't resave your time.
Super heating.
It says that was to do with what many people in the room.
Okay.
And that's off and on. Was it right, Paul?
If you turn it off, you doesn't lose the picture altogether.
What?
Country. When you figures like that, which really tell a very different picture.
So what would the capacity of the workhouse be?
Sorry?
Well, the capacity of the workhouse, what was it?
300.
Oh, sorry.
300. And they had to make special provision then when the numbers went up, they had to build, they had to make some of the outhouses at the back, they had to make them available for people. And also they opened up a fever hospital later on. But we'll come to that point later. And you can see that the figures after 1847, the worst years of the famine, figures begin to decline, but not greatly. And even in the last year of the famine, 1851, it's running at three or four times what it was in 1841, and still running above the average which was intended for of 300. Also, it's worth remembering that actually disease killed more people at the time of the famine than lack of food. And the main diseases that affected people were typhus, which is spread by unhealthy living conditions, which is spread by ticks and by lice. Relapsing fever, which was pain, initially began with pains in the joints and the headaches, and then a fever developed. And then the person very often recovered, and they were well for maybe a week, and then they relapsed again, hence the name. And very often when they relapsed again, it was fatal. Dysentery, which was a form of diarrhea, which was known as the bloody flux. Famine dropsy, which was an accumulation of water in the body. And if the pictures that you see frequently on television of children with swollen bellies in countries that are suffering from lack of food. That would be a symptom of edema. But the body seemed to swell and the stomach seemed to swell, but it was really liquid. Scurvy, which is caused by a lack of vitamin C, I think, used to affect the sailors on long voyages, and it affected their gums very often. Their gums became swollen and bled, and old wounds opened up. Marasmus is a form of undernourishment, and undernourishment, marasmus left those people that were affected by it, left them open, vulnerable to other diseases that wouldn't normally be fatal, diseases or complaints like whooping cough and scarlatina, complaints like that. And ophthalmia was another. Ophthalmia is caused by lack of vitamin A, which is it was a disease of the eyes. So these are all diseases that affected people during the famine. This is a picture by a man called Daniel MacDonald of the discovery of the potato blight in 1845. And you can see there are 3 generations represented. The older man at the back, he's not actually looking at the potatoes at all, he's looking up to the heavens. And you know, the idea that this is a punishment from God, I think the artist is possibly trying to represent that. And the children are just being very often unaware of the danger. But look closely at the people who are represented. And we'll see some of them again. See this lady here. We see those people again represented in another picture, which I'll show you near at the end. And in fact, for the rest of the period, it's not going to make any great demands on you intellectually, but I'm going to show you pictures relating to the famine. And this is a picture of carrying out the dead from a house that has been affected, where there's been a death due to the famine. You can see the very romantic background, hills and lakes and so on, and the very dilapidated condition of the house that the people lived in. And there's a wooden box passing for a coffin on the back of the cart, and the body has been carried out. This is a cartoon that appeared in the London Illustrated News. And the London Illustrated News was not particularly sympathetic to the Irish at the time of the famine. And the idea here is the man coming up, and if you look at him, he's almost got simian, like ape-like features. This was how the Irish were frequently portrayed in the Illustrated London News. There was a lot of anti-Irish bias at that time. And he's coming up to this well-fed gentleman, and he's saying, spare a trifle, your honour, for a poor Irish lad to buy a bit of a blunderbuss with. And this was the suggestion that the Irish, that they were a very troublesome race, and that if they were given money to buy food, they would really use it to buy a gun. This is it's a picture advertising, I suppose, the advantages of emigration. And it's showing the 2 different states. The state in Ireland of poverty, and the state, if you emigrated to America or Canada or Australia, you would be well fed, you'd be well looked after and well catered for. This, following the Irish famine, there were the landlords, to make their land viable, they engaged in evictions, and evictions were widespread throughout the time of the famine. And this is a picture illustrating an evictions by an artist called Frederick Goodall. And the children again playing away innocently, unaware of the tragedy that's taking place around them. This is another illustration from the London Illustrated News depicting an eviction. And you can see the police or the army here have come along to ensure that there's no trouble. This is the man who's been evicted, this is his wife, this is the landlord or perhaps his agent. These are just neighbours. And notice again the way they're portrayed, all with their square chin and simian-like features. No great sympathy for the plight of the Irish at that time. And this is a family who have decided to leave Ireland. And they're getting the blessing of the local priest or pastor here before they leave. And their pitiable possessions are being placed on the back of the horses before they leave. This here is called, it's a bridge outside Falcara in County Donegal. And it's known as the Bridge of Tears, because the family of the person emigrating would leave them as far as this bridge, and at this bridge they would say goodbye. And they would say goodbye to people whom they would never see again, because to come back from America or Canada was extremely, it would be expensive, and it didn't happen very often. So people, they would leave them here, and then the person going away would make their goodbyes, and they would travel on, probably on foot, from there to Derry on Mobile to catch a ship taking them to Canada or to America. And this is Irish emigrants waiting for a train. Pretty well dressed there. And this is at the dockside. And you can see you can just perhaps make out the destinations that are portrayed here: Boston, New York, and I can't quite make out what the other one is, Boston and New York. If you go to the Ulster American Folk Park outside Omagh, there's a replication of a ship, a coffin ship that was used at that time. And this is a scene portraying what it might have looked like when an emigrant arrived at Quebec or at Boston or New York. And you can see here he's like an innocent abroad, and these young lads are probably going to pick his pocket or take advantage of him in some way. And the Irish, they weren't at pretty hard times when they got to Canada and when they got to America. They weren't always accepted by what was largely a white Anglo-Saxon and Protestant culture there. Many of them didn't get much further than here. This is Grosse Ile, at the entrance to an island at the entrance to the St. Lawrence River. There are something like 5,000 Irish people who are buried there at Grosse Ile. Glance that the western part of Ireland fared much worse than the eastern part. Many of us today think of Ireland, we think of the main division in Ireland as being north and south. More accurate division of Ireland, certainly in the 19th century, would have been east and west. The east was much more prosperous than the west. The west was more densely populated. The worst land, paradoxically, was the most densely populated, except for County Armagh. But you can see that Ulster fares quite well during the famine, and yet that's, as I've said to you before, it's a wee bit misleading, because counties like Fermanagh and Monaghan and Cavan, which were in Ulster at that time, Ireland was undivided, did not fare well. The percentage loss of population was in excess of 25%, and it's much lower in County Antrim as a whole. And you can see that the worst counties affected there were on the west coast: Mayo and Sligo, parts of Kerry and Cork, and County Roscommon. This map here illustrates the percentage change by county. And again you can see that Ulster fares better as a whole. It fares better than the rest of Ireland. Leinster, again on the east coast, doesn't fare too badly either. But the west coast fares worse. And the worst county of all is Roscommon. And if any of you have travelled to Strokestown, you'll know that the National Famine Museum is in Strokestown in County Roscommon, for a very good reason, because it fared so badly during the famine. How is the famine commemorated? The famine is commemorated in this way here. It's commemorated in a mural. This is in West Belfast. and it shows people in dire straits. A mural on the wall in West Belfast, and it's called here on Gorta Mor, the Great Hunger. The Great Hunger. As I say, there were many famines in Ireland, and partial and complete famines between 1816 and 1842. It's commemorated in Dublin by these figures outside the Custom House, and the keys outside the Custom House. I'm sure some of you have seen them, those sculptures. This is another sculpture commemorating the famine. Have any of you seen it?
Yeah, Dr. Patrick.
Yes, it's opposite Patrick at the place called Morish, and it's a famine ship. And if you look closely at it, you could go up, the sails look very ragged there, but if you look closely at what's supposed to be the ragged sails, you'll see that it is in fact a depiction of skeletal figures like this here. This is the famine memorial in Boston, and again you can see on one side what conditions were like before the people emigrated, and then when they have taken up residence in the New World, so conditions were much better. This is the Australian famine memorial, and you see many names that are familiar, people who have emigrated from perhaps this part of the country. Names like Donnelly, Dowd, Fahy, and so on. You can see them there for yourselves. This is there's a graveyard, a lonely graveyard on the hills outside Ballycastle at Crockethinney. And a lot of the people who died in the workhouse in Ballycastle were taken out, and I've been told they were taken on handcarts, and they were buried in that graveyard beside the Ballintoy Road, White Park Road. And this is the only memorial to those people, a marble slab, and it says erected in 2006. The site is known as the Pauper's Graveyard, dedicated to the memory of those who are buried here, approximately 400 souls, from the Ballycastle Union Workhouse, built 1841, and victims of the Great Famine. And there's another bit about a German princess being elected to be buried there. This is the commemoration of the Great Famine in Belfast. It's a stained glass window by Calwood and Company in the City Hall in Belfast, depicting the Great Famine, what the Great Famine was like. If you're ever in Belfast, if you're interested, call in and have a look at that. It might interest you to know that the main famine memorial in New York is called the Ballycastle Cottage. And a cottage from Ballycastle was taken down stone by stone, and it was taken across the sea to New York, and it was erected there. You can see part of it there, and you can actually see a skyscraper in the background. And having told you that, I have to apologise, because it's not Ballycastle in County Antrim, it's Ballycastle in County Mayo. I misled you very deliberately there, sorry about that. As I say, the famine is contentious, and it's even a political issue. And National's view of Gorta Mor, the Great Hunger, is, and these are the allegations which were made at the time against Britain by people like John Mitchell, for example, who said that there was a deliberate policy of genocide, that the government did not prohibit grain export. There was actually grain, food, being exported from Ireland during the time of the famine. Another allegation which was made was that the government should have continued the use of soup kitchens. Use of soup kitchens, food was provided, soup was provided cheaply, and it was sufficient to keep people going. But that policy was only continued for about 6 months. And as I say, it was all tied into the doctrinaire ideas of a Whig government, that the government should not interfere in the running of industry or of things like this here. The wages for public works were too low. The average wage was about 8p a day, which was barely sufficient to keep people going. Poor law relief was too restrictive, mass evictions were not curtailed, and the famine was not treated as an imperial responsibility. One of the great surprising things about the famine is that it occurred so late, and it also occurred at the centre of what was at that time the greatest empire that probably the world had ever seen. Britain was one of the richest countries in the world. Ireland, Britain's political slum, if you want, next door. This famine was allowed to happen. These are the allegations that are made against Britain. Britain, they didn't do enough, and what they did do was insufficient. As I say, those are the allegations that are made. And Tony Blair, a couple of years ago, apologised on behalf of Britain for Britain's lack of involvement at the time of the famine. And we'll finish off with the results of the Irish famine. What were they? A decline in population. As I told you at the start, the population of Ireland in 1841 was over 8 million, 8,175,000. When the next census was taken, the population of Ireland had dropped to just over 6 million. So that represented a decline of 2 million, rather more than 2 million if you take into consideration the people, the children who would have been born during that time if their parents had lived. So there was a drastic drop, and that decline in population continued. That trend continued right throughout the rest of the 1800s, up to about 1926 in Southern Ireland. Begins to level out then, and it's only in recent times, very recent times, that the trend in population in Southern Ireland has begun to rise again. The famine it's left a great chasm between Britain and Ireland. There was a change to mixed farming. No longer were people happy to depend on one crop to keep them going. They became involved in pastoral farming as well as tillage. And consolidation of holdings, where the farm was handed on to the eldest son, the system of primogeniture. It was handed, rather than being split up among several sons, it was handed on to the one son. Later marriages, or no marriages at all, the marriage delayed or not taking place at all. If any of you have read the book by William Trevor, The Ballroom of Romance, you know the kind of setup that it was, where these, eligible bachelors of 50 plus came down from the mountain and swanked it into the dance hall, thinking that they were God's gift to all the women who were there, smelling of grill cream and whiskey and very often carried on. There was also a decline in the Irish language. The Irish language, the part of Ireland that was most affected by the famine was also the part of Ireland where Irish was most frequently spoken. Places like Mayo, the west of Ireland, Mayo and Cork and Kerry. Donegal didn't fare too badly during the famine. Decline in the Irish language, as I've just said, and embittered relations with landlords and government. The landlords who replaced, many of the landlords suffered pretty badly themselves during the famine, and many of them sold out afterwards. But the landlords who came in, who were very often Irish, were sometimes actually worse than the landlords which had preceded them. And that is the last picture which I'm going to show you. I did ask you to pay particular attention to the one. I think this is maybe a later scene here of an eviction, featuring people, maybe not the same people, featuring people very like them. It's worth looking at in some detail, I think. The roof has been, the roof has fallen in. The door has been barred, and in fact, the idea of breaking an entry, I've heard it said that that's where the phrase originated, where the door was boarded up, and if you broke down the door to get back into the house, you were guilty of breaking an entry. The woman here carrying the baby in her arms, she's not looking towards, she's looking up again towards the heavens, asking God as if, what has happened here, what's happened. There's possessions that have been thrown out and are lying there broken. The man is handing the key of the house to the landlord or the landlord's agent. And the police, again, the RIC or the soldiers in the background are there to maintain law and order. But I think by far and away the most interesting person is this gentleman on the right. He's reaching into his coat, into his pocket. What has he got there? It's a direct, perhaps a tenuous, but there is a link there between the famine and the subsequent history of Irish republicanism. And that's all I have to say, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Frank. I think it's a lot of very tragic and sad the years the famine was. Over how they restored the right length until even today. They're still suffering the consequences. Will you take a few questions?
Well, if you ask them in the right way, if you start by saying, do you know? I'll answer yes or no. I'll answer all those questions.
Any questions?
I'd be happy to take.
Could I ask you, is there a difference between a poor house and a workhouse?
Not really. I think the poor house was simply the way it was often referred to. I can remember my own parents talking about the poor house. Really what they meant was the workhouse. I think they're one of the things. Yes, sir.
Those who emigrated to America obviously paid something or other to get a vote. How did they get that money if it was there?
They often went as indentured servants. They made a contract with their employer that they would pay that money back. And even in comparatively recent times, there was what was called assisted passages, where you would pay, you could go to Canada for £10. I remember Belgium. And you know, they scraped together what they could. Jerry McKinley, many of you remember, had a shop here in Ballycastle. And Jerry's people were the agents they were shipping agents for people from this area who emigrated. And I see that Sean McMichael is going to talk to him. I'm sure Sean will mention about Jerry's people. But Jerry McKinley had the accurate stubs of the tickets that people bought from this area, from around Ballycastle. And they went to exotic places. They went to initially to New York and Boston, and then they would catch a train and they'd go to San Francisco. You could have bought a ticket here in Ballycastle, you would have taken the right to San Francisco.
Anybody else?
You let me up later.
It's maybe no question, it's just, you know, to relate the famine here in 45 to the Scottish famine in 43, you know, and the tears, the Scottish tears, you know, and the evictions and everything. And even to the export of grain and livestock to the south of Ireland, when it was needed in Scotland, you know, they reflect each other.
They do.
And to me that says there was a state of mind in the south of England, which probably still exists. You know, that was the thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, and the native could go. And I mean, they were cleared out and when the eviction notices were being read to the tenants, they couldn't even understand them. They had to get the Presbyterian minister, who was the only person who could translate for them what an act would be said, and the woman took it upon themselves rather than have the men arrested or hung. They took it upon themselves to challenge the constabulary and in some cases the elements of the army who came to arrest them, you know, and they were thrown down to the ground and kicked, you know, out of existence. Well documented stuff, you know, but to me, the one situation replicates the other, but they didn't learn anything from the Scottish one 2 years earlier. They just repeated the same thing and probably improved upon it by the bit more brutality.
One point that you mentioned there that I'd like to pick up on, like there, you know, in Ulster, the literacy was higher in Ulster than it was in any other part of Ireland. And that may help to explain why they didn't fare quite so badly during the famine, because they were able to read things like furlough notices and notices, governmental regulations and advertisements for emigration and that kind of thing as well. So the literacy was higher it was actually higher in Ballycastle than it was in any other part of County Antrim. You can see it declining as you go around.
And you talk about demigration, I mean, again, there was a landlord in Canada who were screaming for you know, to get these people out there, and they were endangered before they got on the boat, and there seemed to be an element of collusion, you know, between them trying to populate these big estates that have been, or land masses that have been acquired by certain people in Canada, and getting rid of them from the Highlands of Scotland, you know. That actually reminds me, just brought back the Highlands of Scotland, here them all out again.
Canada was very thinly populated. Many of the people who left Ireland went there. There's a story actually told about a farmer out in Saskatchewan, and this young man from Ballycastle arrived at the farm and he got a job. And a short while later, he sent word home when his brother came out, and the farmer asked him, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Ballycastle." "Oh, no, I've heard that before, yeah." And then a while later that, another brother came out, and he asked him, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Ballycastle too." And the farmer said, "Geez, it must be some city, this Ballycastle."
Is that it?
Well, you let me off late.
Hey, thanks very much again. Thank you for Hey folks, just before you go, two things. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the technical difficulty I was halfway through. The pressure definitely was on me there for a minute or two. Two other things now, where you'll see the blackboard behind me, and there's one of these in each and every one of your sheets there. Our next lecture is on the 15th of November, and it's by Keith Beatty. Keith, he was the museum manager in Ballymoney, and he's now the manager of the Sea Museum in Derry. But Keith has wrote extensively about the United Irish Rebellion, particularly in North Antrim. He's covered a good bit of ground in Ballycastle. On this night we will also have an exhibition of Napoleonic weaponry and stuff that was very relevant to the 1798 period. And the second point is, now, we don't ask for nothing for this. This is all very, you know, it's all funded, it's all free. But if anybody would like to get involved with the Friends of Ballycastle Museum, as I said to you before, we run the museum on the out of season, which would start then at Easter, take us in through to July. The council they take that one for July and August, and then we finish up in the last month of September. It only ends the weekends there, Friday 10 till 6, Saturday 10 till 6, and a Sunday from 2 to 6. So what we ask of our volunteers is to do 4 hours per month. It's really not a lot. So if anybody would like to get involved or give us a hand out, get in touch with me or contact the Facebook page. Okay, thank you.